So good morning, everybody.
Morning.
My name is Jeffrey Conradi. I'm here at the Fox School of Business. I work in the International Programs Office, and we have a grant from the United States federal government at the Department of Education called CIBER, which stands for Center for International Business Education and Research. There's three main areas of the grant. Some of it supports programming for our students, international business travel and curricular enhancement. And then we also support international business research and then community partnerships. And through our community partnerships, I know many of you here in the room today. How many of you, is this your first time ever in Berkeley? This is great. All right. There's a lot of new people in this room. We run events in this room all the time. We're so glad you can be here. My office is on this floor. I've worked here for almost 10 years, and my office has been on this floor. And so it's especially exciting to welcome a bunch of new people here ready to engage in this great conversation. I've been involved, some of you may have been at the original meeting a couple of years back, just across the crosswalk here, which catalyzed our region to have this discussion around what can we all be doing collaboratively as it relates to international students in our region, the impact of international students in our region, and the pipeline into business, which all of this aligns perfectly with our grant. As our goal is international trade growth, export growth, certainly education and tourism fits into that. So this is an important day. I look forward to introducing colleagues from Campus Philly, International House Philly in a moment. Been working very hard for a long time to pull together data and impact to have engaging conversations. You know, we had talked about, could this be a virtual event? Could be other formats? It's like, no, this is the way to do it. We need to get everybody in a room and engage with this content. That's why we have set up the round tables. So that's really all I wanted to say to kick off. If you need to use the restroom, it's through that door and then down to your left. There's still plenty of refreshments over there. There's Saxby's Coffee Shop, it's great, downstairs, which is entirely run by our students. So go check that out and support them. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jen Keevy, the director of Campus Philly.
Everybody, it is so great to see so many friends and partners in the audience. Let's get the slideshow started here. There we go. All right, so I just want to make sure well, Jeffrey, first and foremost, thank you for hosting us. Let's give another round of applause to Temple. Great coverage today. I'm certainly not alone in this work. I'm here with my colleague, Bill Keys. We're going to go through and do intros of our organizations in just a moment. Before we even get started, though, we have a lot of thank yous to give to folks here in the audience. So first and foremost, the Chamber of Commerce is our #1 supporter in this research and really bringing this to life. They certainly believe in this work and understand the importance of international talent. We're also supported by the Department of Commerce from the City of Philadelphia and the Philadelphia International Airport, hosted here at Temple by the CIBER program. And last but certainly not least, our research partners, the folks, the brains behind really pulling all of this data, bringing it all together, eConsult, and Ethan's here today. So thank you to all of our partners. A little bit about Campus Philly. We are a 20-year-old economic development organization that aims to keep college-educated talent in the region. We really fuel this work through a couple of different avenues. One, we aim to attract students to Greater Philadelphia to be here to go to school. We know that Philadelphia is America's college town. There are over 325,000 students in Greater Philadelphia. We want to make sure that they know that they can stay here and build their careers. And how do they do that? Through engagement. They fall in love with Philadelphia by really being turned on to all the incredible assets and partnerships and ways of being here in the city and region. And certainly, if it's not for the opportunity to intern and have jobs and employment in the region, they won't stay. And so we're certainly grateful to all of our employers who continue really to keep this early career talent pipeline going. We provide all kinds of programs and services to college students, whether that's content sharing, whether that's really highlighting the best place to go on a Friday night. We've got really great resources for college students. And last but not least, in the research space, we have a keen eye on ensuring we understand how many students and young people are retained in the region. And more recently, specifically looking at this international subset. And we're really excited to share that data with you today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bill to introduce IHB.
Thanks, Dan. And I'll echo the thanks for everyone coming here today. We love to see this kind of collaborative spirit around this work and hope that this will be an inspiring session in terms of the data international students, graduates in the region. So International House Philadelphia, if you're not familiar, we've been around for about 100 years, and our whole mission has revolved around international student support since we started back in the early days of the 1900s. The way we've delivered on our mission has changed in the last few years. So the house was closed a few years ago, and now we support international students and scholars in a number of different ways. Our vision really revolves around attracting, supporting, and retaining international students and scholars in our region. Do we have any international students and graduates in this room right now? Okay, excellent. Thank you for joining us. We have student-based events set up every month. So if you're interested in getting plugged in the community, please check out our social media and stuff. We also partner with higher eds, so we provide trainings, we provide presentations. We love to deepen our relationships with the higher eds of the region. And then we also do work like this, which is essentially community engagement and advocacy. So we're thrilled to be partnering with Campus Philly for this research and for our employer toolkit that you will see soon in the next, I think, few weeks, I hope. So yeah, we can dive in.
All right, yeah, thank you. Okay, all right, let's get started. So I want to set the stage before we get into all of the data that we have around international students specifically. So the data I'm going to share first and foremost is from our Philadelphia Momentum study that we produced last year in 2023. And ultimately, we were looking at the retention of college-educated students in the region. Philadelphia has an interesting history in this space. When Campus Philly was founded 20 years ago, we were only retaining about 25% of our college-educated talent. We certainly knew as a city and a region, if we wanted to grow and meet our economic development goals, we needed more talent, and we needed to make sure we were retaining the young people who were coming here to study. Fast forward 20 years, we have made great stride in this space. We were very pleased to note that we are now retaining over 50% of our college-educated talent in the region. That is up, it's a 155% increase when we look at the numbers of people who are ultimately choosing to stay in Greater Philadelphia, call this place home, and build their careers. It was really a driver of growth for this region and city over the last 20 years. To that, I just wanted to point out a couple other things about the realities of our demographics in Greater Philadelphia. Now, how many folks in here are from the higher ed community? Okay, the majority. We've been talking about this enrollment cliff for the last 15 years, haven't we? Ever since these young people were born. You can see it visualized on this screen. If you look at the population spike of 25 to 34-year-olds, those are the folks who have chosen to stay in Greater Philadelphia and be retained and be part of our community here. But look at that demographic cliff immediately after of 15 to 24-year-olds. We have known this was coming for a long time, and we're seeing it certainly in our enrollment numbers in higher education, and employers are seeing it, frankly, in the workforce as well. We know that we need multiple new solutions to ensuring that we have the talent that we need to grow and thrive here in Greater Philadelphia. And at Campus Philly, we think about this in a couple different ways. We certainly think about local talent, making sure that there are ample opportunities for people throughout the city and region to access the tremendous higher ed network we have here in Greater Philadelphia. We certainly want to make sure we retain the young people who come here to go to school. And frankly, there are efforts around talent attraction. Who can we bring here after they graduate elsewhere? So we're looking at that full pipeline. And today we're going to be talking about the international segment in particular. I just wanted to point out really how significant these numbers are on I guess it's your right-hand side of the slide there. That really is the difference between Gen Z and millennial generation. Over $115,000 person difference in this region. It really is stark when you look at that. And when you even compare it to the baby boomers who are exiting out of the workforce, that also just adds to the complexity of the issue that we're dealing with here. So to share a couple highlights, and then we'll get into some of the bulk of the research here. I want to set the stage for thinking about international talent here in Greater Philadelphia. Frankly, employers cannot afford to overlook international talent. That cannot be stated enough. In Philadelphia, we have 15% of our, at 15%, the state of Philadelphia has a large share of foreign-born population, compared both to Greater Philadelphia, which is coming in at 10%, and the nation in total, which is 14%. So we have real opportunity here in Greater Philadelphia because the people are here, the international talent is here. We have over 55,000 foreign-born students that are age 16 plus in Greater Philadelphia. Some of them are international students, others are here with their families and have been going to school here in this region. And something to note about this group, this is a highly educated group as well. 32% of Philadelphia's foreign-born population, 25 years and older, have at least a bachelor's degree. And that's compared to 34% of the total population. And when we look at the broader county, broader region, 47% of the foreign-born population in Greater Philadelphia, 25 years and older, have at least a bachelor's degree. So such a tremendous opportunity really to tap into this highly educated, highly available group of people. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bill to talk a little bit more about the ins and outs of the research.
Right, thanks, Jan. Before we dive in, I just wanted to note we will have an amazing panel discussion coming up. We're going to have about a 10 or 15-minute break between this presentation and the panel for kind of a table discussion. And we also have some index cards on your table. So if questions come up, Jen or I, or during the panel, you can write them down and we'll collect them as the panel is seated so that we can ask some at the end. So by all means, please write your questions down and we'll come around during the panel. So as we dive into the research here, our original goal really was to determine the economic impact of former international students who had graduated from area institutions and entered the workforce. But in the course of getting into the work with eConsult, it became clear that based on the data sets available, it would be really difficult to actually capture accurately students who had graduated from Philadelphia area colleges and universities and stayed in the workforce, just because of the data sets that are out there. And this is actually a really great opportunity to contextualize international students and graduates of US institutions within the bigger picture of international talent locally. So this is kind of the picture of who forms the focus of this study, who we're describing in this study. So the kind of four pillars are folks who are in the region, in the workforce, are non-citizens, and have at least a bachelor's degree. So those are the four things to remember about this population that is about 68,000 strong. So this could include international graduates who went to college in anywhere else in the US. So in Nebraska and came to the Philadelphia area to work. Could include folks who studied overseas and came here on H-1B or other visa status. Could include international students, yes, from colleges in our region, as well as recent international graduates from, folks who are, so folks who graduated from Philadelphia area colleges. Along the way, we did get some really neat insights into the international student population and some trends, so I'll share those first, but then when I talk about the economic impact, we're panning out and looking at this bigger picture population described here. So bear in mind, we're talking about 68,000 people in the region, in the workforce, non-citizen, and have at least a bachelor's degree. All right, so we'll take a look at international student trends, and I'll start by providing some context. So I think most of the folks involved in international education in the room will be very familiar with the Open Doors data. This is a census that's taken every year by the Institute of International Education that tries to get the clearest count of the number of international students across the country. And essentially what we've seen since the 1950s is a gradual increase in the number of international students in the country. And then in the last couple of decades alone, so since 2000, the number of international students doubled. It's probably worth remembering as we dive into some of the details on academic fields that international students account for approximately 6% of overall enrollment in the US, compared to a much higher saturation rate in other countries. So in other Anglophone countries, it's hovering between 20 and 25%. So the US, basically, as we think about the context of the enrollment flip as well, we have huge excess capacity compared to some of our competitor countries around the world. So it's also an important point to note that IIE has projected that in the next 5 years alone, the number of international students in the country could as much as double. So right now, there are approximately 1 million international students in the US. There's a possibility that we could see this number significantly increase. So to Jen's point about international talent being a pool of talent that we cannot afford to overlook, higher eds are going to have to brace for the impact of an enormous swathe of international students coming to the US, potentially. And employers will have to think critically about how to build a talent pipeline for these graduates as well. especially considering the overrepresentation in key fields. So we'll talk about that in a sec. But in the Philadelphia area, so zooming into the MSA region, the increase over the last kind of decade or so matches kind of to the national trends. We are seeing that in our region, 8% of all degrees are earned by foreign-born students, compared to 6% nationally. So we're tracking higher than the national average on the number of international graduates we produce as a region. So you can see when we break this down to the academic level, the share earned by postgraduate students is much higher than the share earned by bachelor's degree holders. So there's a little bit to unpack here. But this graph really, it shows a few things. So firstly, it provides some interesting insight into the bigger picture of graduate trends, with by far and away the largest numbers of students earning degrees, and this is domestic students, American students, as well as international students, in business, management, and marketing, and then health professions. So it gives you a sense of kind of how we're supplying the needs of our regional workforce. But then if we look specifically at international graduates, the top 3 fields in our region really match with the national data, which suggests that the most popular programs for international students are business, management, marketing, computer science, and engineering. So when we take a look at the kind of market share, we see that international students represent an outsized share of degree completions in computer and information sciences, at fully 24%. Maths and statistics, 24% of all graduates are international in this region. Engineering, 18% of graduates are international, 17% of physical sciences graduates are international. And remember again, what was the enrollment percentage nationwide? Anyone? 6%. So when we think about this in comparison to that stat, this population is drastically overrepresented. And when I say that, I mean in a helpful way, right? Because we need people who are in these roles, in these fields, powering our innovation economy. This is also a good point to note that this is not data from our research, but this is IPED's data. In 2022, 35% of STEM master's degrees and fully 41% of STEM PhD degrees were earned by international students in this country. So, especially as we get into this critical inflection point in the US, as we go into election season, there's a lot of noise about immigration. It's really important to remember the core importance of this talent pool, not just our regional workforce, but also driving innovation in the US. So I think those of you who are involved in international education, again, you will be familiar with some of the terminology around the pathways into the workforce that are permitted on a student visa. But I'll give a bit of a sort of quick 101 for folks who are not au fait with that. So a student visa essentially allows international graduates to work for 1 to 3 years post-graduation in a field related to their study. This authorization is called OPT, or Optional Practical Training. And for any employers in the room, it is super easy to hire graduates on OPT. They are essentially the same to hire as a domestic candidate. And thanks to a Freedom of Information request a few years back, ICE essentially released a tranche of data that helped to identify the extent to which students utilizing this work authorization stayed within their region or picked up and moved elsewhere. And what we can see from this data, if you look at the grey line in the middle, that is folks who earned their degrees in the Philadelphia region, international students on an F1 visa who earned their degrees here and went into the workforce. And then you can see that increases drastically over time, kind of matches with the curve we saw on enrollment. But the green line here is the share that stayed in Philadelphia once they went onto OPT. So you can see that share has declined and declined and declined. So as of 2016, and I know this is almost a decade ago, that share was only about 30% of the folks who we trained, we put all these resources into in our region, and then launched into the workforce only to say, oh, goodbye, see you in Silicon Valley. So this indicates, at least as of 2016, that we still have a lot of work to do to build pathways into employment here in the region, and also just to retain this talent. Hopefully, I think there's been some concerted efforts to get a new release of this ICE data. I don't know why they hoard it, because it's so useful for all this work we do. But it would be great once we have that, we can work with it and talk about what that looks like today. But this trend would suggest if we extrapolate a bit, I don't anticipate that we are quite crossing those lines. Okay, so we'll take a look at the economic impact of these graduates in our region now. So we'll pan back out to that full population of 68,000 people, again, folks who have a bachelor's degree, are in our region, are in the workforce, and are non-US citizens. So what we see is that the total economic output, and this is based on the earnings of this population, these 68,000 people in our region, in the whole region is $5.7 billion per year. So it's a pretty considerable driver for our regional economy. And this number of folks earning these salaries, spending money in our region, directly supports 26,300 jobs. I know on the international education side, we love to talk about the NAFSA data. NAFSA provides this amazing economic impact calculator tool where you can see that in Pennsylvania, for example, currently enrolled international students spend about $2 billion a year and support 22,000 jobs. There are about 50,000 across the state, but that's just a portion of the impact. So I think as international educators and nonprofits talk about this issue, we need to talk about the bigger picture of the impact, not just while students are enrolled, but throughout the span of their time as non-US citizens. The last thing I'll note here is the annual tax revenue impact from international graduate retention as well, because this is a whole other piece of the puzzle. And you can see in the city, it's almost $50 million each year. In the state, and I'll note this is just the MSA again. So while it says City of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, these are just a portion of those states. So it's still the 68,000. Where's Ethan? Am I doing this right? Still the 68,000 contributions of 68,000 folks in that population are $328 million in terms of the tax income for those respective tax districts. So pretty important to our tax base. And just as a kind of reference point, if you add the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the 165.3 million and the 47.6, that's about 213 million, which is approximately 3 times the income of the soda tax each year. So it's a pretty substantial amount of money that goes to our tax coffers as a result of retaining this population. So the bottom line here is the more we can do to keep these international graduates in our workforce post-graduation, the better a driver they are for our economy, the more jobs are supported, and the bigger our tax base. Then I'll hand back over to you.
More to go. A couple of additional slides talking about really the potential of international graduates and regional growth. Really, the opportunity we have as a region if we are more fully embracing this particular part of the demographic. And I'm going to show a couple really sector trends here that we'll share. Let's see if I can move this little. So I can move this box so it's not everybody's way. All right, there we go. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So this particular slide here, employment trends for key knowledge sectors in Greater Philadelphia. This is painting the picture of the big industries and big sectors in Greater Philadelphia that we know are growing. Ultimately, this gives you a 10-year outlook here for the industry growth trends in educational services, healthcare, social assistance, finance and insurance, and then all of those professional and scientific services as well. This data was pulled from the Bureau of Economic Analysis in 2024, and you'll see when we start to look at some of this other data, this is where the magic of all the analysis comes in. We have to start matching degree types to industries and things of that sort. But this is the picture of some of the big industries we know are growing here in Greater Philadelphia. When we think about the international graduate completions by major here in Greater Philadelphia, what degrees are these young people ultimately graduating with in our region? We start to see some trends here, certainly. These students are graduating with degrees across the spectrum, but certainly in sectors including business management and marketing, engineering, computer and information sciences, health professions and related programs, biological and biomedical sciences. Those are some of the big fields where we see graduate output in this space. So then when we ultimately think about the average annual job postings, so the job availability here in Greater Philadelphia, so we've talked about those key sectors, we've talked about ultimately the degrees that these young people are earning. Let's talk about the job postings that are available in our economy. We start to see some trends and matchups here. Currently the top sector here in Greater Philadelphia, colleges and universities, annual postings of over 5,700. Certainly it's probably no No coincidence that colleges and universities are some of the biggest employers of international talent here in Greater Philadelphia. When we think about some of the other industries here, you start to see the matchup: computer systems and design services, pharmaceutical medicine and manufacturing, scientific technical consulting services. We really do start to see that the international graduate population has the skills and credentials. They're earning those skills and credentials here, and they align with regional workforce demands across key sectors, including life sciences, healthcare, professional services, computer and information sciences, and certainly engineering. Again, we cannot understate that employers cannot afford to overlook international talent here in Greater Philadelphia. So with that, we are going to move into table discussion. And we hope you'll take what Bill and I just shared and spend a couple moments while we get our panel set to talk with your teams. You'll notice at your tables, you have a sheet of paper that looks like this. We ask that one person at the table act as the scribe and write down some of your feedback for your table. Go refresh your beverages, all that kind of stuff too. But we will be back up here in just about 10 minutes with the panel. So please have a conversation with one another and network. And use those index cards on the table too, if you have questions for us or the panel. Thank you.
Nominated you as the scribe.
So today, I'll just note really quickly that the
Oh, yeah, yeah. I had for a while then I lost. Yes, I'm.
Okay, everybody, we're going to ask that you please take your seats. We're going to start the panel. Hopefully, everybody had good conversation at their tables and have lots of feedback for Bill and I. We're looking forward to all of your feedback on the research. Just a couple of reminders as we get ready to launch this panel. If you have any questions that come up for the panelists, use those index cards that you have on the table. If you run out, use another piece of scrap paper. Bill and I will be around to collect those. We're going to curate the question in the Q&A. And in addition to that, there's just a couple other resources on your table that I wanted to make sure you were aware of. I know IHP has put some materials there, and also Pew has put research there. Now, Pew is in the middle of really a 15-part research study on immigration here in Greater Philadelphia. So such rich information, and that's shared on the tables. So with that, I want to turn it over to Nikki Pumphrey. Nikki is Vice President of Talent and Workforce at the Chamber of Commerce for Greater Philadelphia. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. This is such a great room. I was just saying, like, it's such a good, friendly audience, both because you have either had the experience of being an international student, or you were directly in this work, and or you're part of an economic development organization for whom international students and immigrants are a vital part of the work that you do. So we're really excited to be here. I am pleased to moderate today's panel, but before we get started and we get into it, I would love for my panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll start.
Great, thank you, Nikki. My name is Tom Ginsberg. I am a senior officer at the Pew Charitable Trust. Pew is a global research organization founded in Philadelphia 75 years ago. I do economic development research, demographic research, focus on cities. I'm based here in Philadelphia in our hometown. I've been with Pew for a while and helped set up our Philadelphia research units about 15 years ago. I'm going to hand it over.
Greetings. I'm Dr. Darren Lipscomb, the Associate Vice President for Enrollment Management at Community College of Philadelphia, where I've been for the past 3 years. Prior to that, at Delaware County Community College for 11 years. And part of my portfolio includes international student services, which we're really excited about and really expecting to grow moving forward.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. My name is Alexandra, or you can call me Allie Mattel. I'm an international trade specialist with the U.S. Commercial Service based here in Philadelphia. And for those of you not familiar, the U.S. Commercial Service is within the U.S. Department of Commerce's International Trade Administration. All those names mean the same thing, a bit of a brand identity crisis there, but we're the export promotion arm of the federal government. So we help U.S.-based, in this case, expand internationally, help with recruit international students, partnerships, just any user of a U.S. educational service. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why education is an export, but that's how this kind of falls into my portfolio here. Great.
Well, as you can see, we've got an incredible lineup of folks for whom this work is really vital to what they do day in and day out. I really want to say thank you to Campus Philly and International House and Bill and Jen in particular, who spent an incredible amount of time rooting us in the data that is supporting today's conversation. As Jen shared, my name is Nikki Pumphrey. I'm the Vice President of Talent and Workforce for the Chamber of Commerce here in Greater Philadelphia. At the Chamber of Commerce, we're thinking about ensuring that our region is a leader a top global business destination, as well as leading inclusive growth. And we know that immigrants and international students are incredibly vital to those two monikers that, you know, we sort of lead with, right? So international students and immigrants are a connection to the rest of the world. And when we say inclusive growth, we need to ensure that immigrants and international students are part of the equation that is helping our region grow and strengthen. As we know, immigrants and international students have been an incredibly vital part of our region over the last 20 years. They are making up more than a third of the growth in our labor market, and 1 in 5 folks who are working here in the region are actually foreign born. And what I really think is important about today's discussion is that often, and tell me if you feel like this is true, we have two conversations. We talk about immigrants, we talk about internationals. We don't often have a conversation that says, what does it look like for our region to welcome folks who have not been born in this country, and what is that broader conversation? I see something that's nothing, so I'll take it as yes. And so this is a rare opportunity really to do that. I do also want to acknowledge that Anush Gupta, the CEO of the Welcoming Center, could not be here with us this morning. His work and the work of the Welcoming Center and many of the other immigrant organizations that work very closely in the community are a vital part of that equation as well. Okay. So I kick us off with the same question for all panelists, which is, today we rooted the conversation in data, and I think that's a really important part, but what are some of the biggest misconceptions that you encounter in your day-to-day work about immigrants and international students, and how are you looking at data to dispel that, either anecdotally or more broadly? And I'll start with you, since your day-to-day is data.
Yeah, because I'm sitting right next to you. Well, my job actually involves looking at what a lot of folks are saying and what we think they need to know or might find useful to know. And our focus is on Philadelphia, and I just want to point out that the majority you have on your tables is the city of Philadelphia, not the metro. And right there begins one of the misconceptions, I think. Philadelphia makes up about a quarter of the population of the metro. I'm sorry, I'm giving data, but all right. And it's of the total population. It's about a third bigger when it comes to the foreign-born population. It makes up more of that population. Very different groups in the city and the suburbs outside the city. So we find that that's a hard distinction for sometimes people to grasp, and sometimes we find that too. And it's particularly when it comes to foreign-born talent and workers, it's a different population we're talking about. There's any number of misconceptions, I guess. One of the biggest ones might be that when it comes to economic questions, we have to understand the economy is a very complex thing, and the metro economy is part of the national economy. And you can be a contributor to the economy, but still be a cost. All newcomers, they come to an area from wherever they're coming, bring some costs. Younger people put cost burdens on the school district. Older people put cost burdens on, they're not necessarily paying, they're paying less taxes to support some of the services they use. So there's always costs and benefits, and there's a balance between them. And immigrants, foreign-born population, bring also costs. They tend to work in lower wage jobs, so that's a cost. And how do we conceptualize this and what's positive? One of the ways we do this, we look over time, how these populations contribute over time. But a great misconception that people have is what they see in front of them versus what they think, or what we know might happen 20, 30, 50 years down the road. Being caught in the now and not seeing the whole expansive history. Philadelphia is a 340-year-old city or something like that. We've gone through many generations. So I guess that's kind of a misconception. How do we focus on tomorrow, not just today?
For me, I guess I'll highlight two primary areas that come to mind. I think the first one for me, I think that sticks out, probably grinds my gears and a number of folks in this, in the room. F1 students are not our only international students. I think I definitely deal with that misconception. When we think of F1 students, we think of them as really our primary means to bring international students on campus. We know that that's not true. A significant number of other populations within that population. The other piece for me, specifically at a community college, F1 students don't come to community college. That's another challenge. So we know, and then I think I'm sorry, there's a third. The other piece, the third one I'd say is that for community college in particular, that we really should have F1 students or international students coming to our institution. So where the interesting thing I think that folks miss out on with that with those misconceptions is that from a data perspective, one, we're seeing growth. We've seen growth for a while now among our F1 visa holders. And again, that's just a segment of our international population. But specifically as a community college, we're seeing a significant number of students who, one, either came on a different visa, came undocumented, are transitioning, have transitioned to permanent residency. Students who have who came on a visa and now have actually obtained citizenship, but they're foreign born. So it's really, when we think about how we're defining international, just really thinking about it through that lens, through understanding that. So that's a biggie. I think the other piece is just, again, I think it's almost an awareness piece for us. We have to really make people aware that there are a number of students who are from community colleges. Again, I mentioned it earlier. Significant growth for me. What that means, we've seen 16% growth over the past year at our institution, and like most institutions, still rebounding to some degree from COVID, where we've seen a significant decline in students that were able to enroll in our institutions. But I think the reason why students are coming to this, well, one, affordability is a big piece. Recognizing that we're about a fraction of the typical cost for students to access a higher education. The other big piece that I think also goes overlooked, the support from a developmental perspective. We're offering developmental courses, and not just for, in English, but also for students that are struggling in math, who are coming to it. So regardless of academic ability, we're in a position to be of support to those students. And that's enough. Those are just biggies. I think the last piece is, and we talked a little bit about this at the table, where we tend to see our enrollment for community colleges. I'm going to speak more generally here. We tend to find we see our enrollments almost reflecting, mirroring migration patterns in that general area. So we know here in Philadelphia, as an example, of course, we're seeing significant uptick from in our Vietnamese population in the city, in our West African population. We see that being reflected on our campuses as community colleges. I can't speak for our four-year institutions, and we also see some of that, but we definitely see it from a community college perspective. So always, again, using some of that to really challenge some of the misconceptions that are out there.
And yeah, to wrap this up here, I'll back up a few steps because most of the work that I do is before a student even gets to the US, although what they experience here and their ability to stay and gain that experience obviously informs the work that I do. But I think one of the misconceptions that I run into quite often, especially I work across the state of Pennsylvania, I have colleagues that cover the middle and western part of the state, but I also work in the state of Delaware. And one of the misconceptions is that the institutions in this area, and we talked a bit about this at our table as well, your competition isn't each other. It's not even your neighboring states. It's the rest of the world. So when we're talking about recruiting international students, we're looking at some of those other English-speaking countries, most commonly like the UK, Australia, places like that, Canada, who are actually reaching a threshold of the amount of students they can have come into their country. So there's just so much opportunity for our US institutions to expand. For a number of reasons, but that being one of them. So all of us being in this room is a great start to this, but working together as a city or a state or even a country to promote ourselves because we all have the same goal, the same mission there, And then on the employer side of things and just the business community side of things, I cover a number of industries, not just education. So I work with manufacturers, service providers, in the greater Philadelphia area quite often, in the other industries that I cover and the other industries that my colleagues cover. And there's just a general unawareness when we're talking to the business community about the impact that international education has. And I've shared some international education numbers at events like this for other industries. And I've seen jaws actually drop when you hear just the billions of dollars that international education is giving back to the US economy, or in our case, in our state. And you heard some of those numbers earlier. But so I think just connections like this and making sure we're giving you all the resources to foster some of those relationships will really inform and assist in the efforts that you're already putting forward.
I appreciate that. Ali, I'm gonna stick with you. One of the things that you said when we were preparing for this panel is that international education is actually an export. And so you just mentioned that in Pennsylvania and both our region, we know that colleges and universities and these institutions play an outsized role broadly in our economy, but also are incredibly influential in ensuring that international students then become part of the fabric of the region, especially economically. So could you say more about international education as an export, and what does that mean? What are you doing every day to ensure that we are competitive versus Sydney, Australia?
Yeah, definitely. And education as an export, probably not for you all, but for some people, it takes a minute to wrap your head around a bit. International education, it's considered a services export, and it's in 2023, it was the seventh, I think it still is, the numbers change every quarter, but it's the 7th largest services export for the United States. So I think it totals about $41 billion for the US economy. That was last year. It's around the same numbers for this year. And what that export looks like, it's generated when international students pay tuition, pay for housing, books, or other fees and related expenses that it takes to either study here in the US or study with the US educational institution. So most commonly, it looks like bringing international students into the US, but it could be any user of a US education service, whether that's software, an online course. It does not have to be at the K through 12 or higher ed level. It could be a training service, it could be an online school, anything like that. So on the day-to-day, I help US institutions or US education companies, we work with a lot of ed tech companies as well, connect to those international users, whatever that looks like for your organization. Most commonly, we provide export support or export counseling, market intelligence, or business matchmaking for that organization. And I know I've worked with a lot of you in this room, so it's great to see so many of you. But most commonly that looks like what we do is the B2B. So at the Department of Commerce, we're matching you with partners. So that may be like an agent, a school, a counselor, not necessarily directly with the students. I'm sure many of you who are in higher ed work with Education USA, which is a complementary agency there with the State Department, who does that connection directly to students. So another benefit of what we do is just giving the institutions access to that suite of federal resources. Most people who need government resources aren't aware of them, and that's general across the board. So the same thing happens in education with all the resources that we have available. And one other thing I just wanted to highlight on just the importance and the federal government really having a focus and an emphasis on is in 2023, the National Export Strategy that was published named international education as a focus industry for the US for the first time ever. So for a little bit of background, the National Export Strategy is helping to shine a spotlight on international education and the economic impact that comes with it. These industries that are named as focus industries in this strategy that's written by the current administration are the industries where they see the most opportunity for economic growth, because the mission of my department here is to foster growth in the US economy, grow US jobs. All of that happens when we're bringing more economic impact into the US. And the national export strategy is a whole of government approach. So I'm talking about my agency that helps with export promotion, but there's a number of agencies, as you can imagine, who have a hand in international trade, but more specifically for international education. That chapter was written by the Department of Commerce, the Department of State, Homeland Security, and the Department of Education. So this chapter coordinates all of our efforts to help expand international education in the US to make sure we're pooling resources properly, but also not duplicating efforts. And this strategy actually has call-outs for these federal agencies on goals or metrics that we need to achieve working with the industry in order to properly execute this strategy. So I think some of my answers for other questions might call out some of those call-outs. I'll make sure to loop back to that, but keep it high level for now. The national export strategy really is informing everything that we do down to the individual institution level and how we're working with schools. But it's really another part of that is shining a light for the entire US business community on international education and its importance.
Well, it definitely sounds like there's going to be an opportunity. We're going to potentially double the number of international students in the next 5 years, right? I think those are staggering numbers, but I think also a great opportunity. One of the things that I heard in your remarks, Allie, is intentionality, right? Of connecting with institutions, of connecting with other businesses. Darren, there's a lot of intentionality that must go into CCP strategy of connecting with students, of taking advantage of the migration patterns that you're already seeing to ensure that those folks that are already coming here know that CCP is an incredible resource. Can you talk a little bit about that strategy and how you're being a little bit more intentional over time?
Yes, I can definitely talk a little bit about it. I think, so historically, we lacked intentionality, with our strategy. Like we lacked strategy, with recruiting students. It was for a while, and this came up a little bit at the table as well. It was a bit more happenstance. It was, if we would call it a strategy, we relied on, a third-party agency that would essentially represent us in our international market. That's not enough. And so it was really us thinking about what does it take for, like, where are our priorities? What are our priorities? Is international recruitment a priority for us, especially when we're talking about F1 visa holders? And if it is, what markets do we want to focus on? So again, you heard me mention earlier, looking at, just migration trends in the US. I think another piece of it was looking at what we were seeing, looking at data that's currently out there around just trends in terms of country of origin throughout the US as well as in Philadelphia, where we'll be seeing, and specifically looking at it by sector of post-secondary education. So looking specifically at community colleges, what were the trends that we were seeing there? And using that information to identify, all right, cool, these are markets that we really need to focus on. These are secondary markets that we need to keep in mind. And then these are markets that, not right now, maybe not for us at the moment. So it had to be, I think another piece of that strategy, we really wanted it to be holistic. When we're thinking about market entry, thinking about really prioritizing this, it can't just be show up in a new country, hey, give me your students, and that's it. That's also not enough. It was really thinking about, all right, how can we really create a give and take relationship, a two-way street in the markets that we enter, and as a part of that strategy, thinking about how we could mirror or follow the lead almost of some of the things that our faculty were doing. So looking at some of the efforts that they were working on. So as one example, I know that we have faculty, so we have faculty who are working on study abroad efforts for next year, really over the next couple of years, because this goes back to 2023. And we looked at where they were looking, the spaces that they were looking at traveling to for study abroad, thinking about how they were supporting our current students, and thinking and looking through to see if that reflected in any way some of the markets that we were seeing that were coming up, and using that really to help determine if that was a market for us right now. And it's not to say that other markets weren't, but just right now with the time, because I think a key piece of the strategy is really relationship building. and being able to, and having some of that, those other supports in play that would allow us to, again, to go into a market without just, and not just focus on, hey, give me your students, really thinking about, hey, what can we do to go there and potentially partner with some entities that are there, partner with the folks there on projects, maybe with classes that we're hosting. I know, so I actually just got back from Ghana, and I'll leave it after this. Just got back from Ghana, and as a part of it, we connected with some of the tribal leaders in Ghana. It was based off of relationships that we've established here, but it was also in line with that. As a part of that, we also partnered with our faculty who were are currently working through a grant to essentially bring students over to Ghana in the future. This is right now, we're looking at some amazing things that I can't give a lot of to share too many details on. But as a part of it, it's just, hey, how can we expose our students to culture in Ghana? How can we address some of the areas of interest that our partners there have, while also finding ways to bring them. So again, just trying to find a holistic means of market entry when we're really thinking about it, and not just holistic from the standpoint of digital marketing and physical presence, but also like, hey, how can we support you as we're there? And that helps to build, again, relationships by way of building trust.
Appreciate that. Tom, I'm gonna put you on the spot a little bit. So we are talking about education as an export, but we know that regional vitality, the economy, is really dependent on folks with all sorts of skills and experience and education, right? Every time that Pew looks at the demographics of immigrants in our region, Philadelphia in particular, you focus on education. And so I'd love for you to say a little bit about what you're seeing around education levels and some of the implications of the varying education levels that we're seeing, and sort of how we think about that from an economic standpoint.
Education is often taken in a lot of the narrative that we're hearing is taken as a proxy for skills. It's hard to measure skills in a comprehensive way. You learn on the job, and it doesn't get recorded by a census taker usually, but education does, and it is more or less a pretty good proxy. Philadelphia, the city, and the more so than the region over the last many decades has had a problem with that. We've had a relatively low educational level and college attainment level. We've noticed in the last decade or so, a little more than that has really started to rise. Philadelphia is now approaching, don't hold me to these numbers, Philadelphia is approaching the national average on college attainment, I think, but certainly getting closer to it. Interestingly, international migration has seen a similar thing. Nationally, the educational level of immigrants coming to America has been rising. The higher and higher percentage of them have college degrees. And in fact, this is not my statistic, but I've heard other people say it, who I trust, that the image of the tired and huddled masses, the inscription at the base of the Statue of Liberty, it's actually not as true as it used to be. We're not getting so much people coming from the less educated, struggling, poor areas of the world. We're getting the cream of the crop more so. And it's not really true. We're getting a lot of highly educated people. We're getting the top level, so much so that some countries are a little worried that we're draining them of their talent. And they're coming to Philadelphia too. We are seeing that in the data. Cities in the United States vary a lot in how they attract people with that kind of profile. Philadelphia is still mostly attracting people with less education compared to, say, Seattle, San Jose. You see highly educated people whose incomes are now surpassing the native population of the median out there. Not the case here. We find that a large percentage of the immigrant workers that we see in the data up until 2022 data at least, half of them were in low wage work and had not much more, in fact, did not have anything above a high school degree. And in many cases, not even that. You find that generally with the foreign-born population, in fact, it's still mostly true nationally, that you have a large number without any schooling, any formal schooling, and a relatively large number with a lot of schooling, and a smaller group in the middle at the community college type level. And that plays out in the economy, and the economy is drawing people, for the most part, for jobs and economic opportunities and affordability. I think that's one of the reasons that Philadelphia has seen a big increase, that we are drawing people. Actually, a pretty high percentage of immigrants in Philadelphia don't come here from abroad, they come here from other US cities. And they may be coming for the affordability of Philadelphia. It's always a balance between affordability and housing and the wage that you can make here, which is lower also. So it's always a mix that way. Education is a driver of all of these trends as a proxy for skills. And we see, and I don't want to ramble too much about this, but what we see related to education in Philadelphia, and I'm talking just about the city, not the metro, so bear with me on that. We see a pretty high entrepreneurship level. And among entrepreneurs in Philadelphia, self-employed immigrants, very low educational level. Opposite that it is for US entrepreneurs who have a very high education. So you see it play out that way.
We'll come back to that. That's your next question, Tom. But so I think a really important point is that folks are both coming here with incredible amount of skills and experience, but also part of why Philadelphia is attractive is because there is access to opportunity. It is clearly all of our work to ensure that there's greater access to opportunity and that folks can actually realize those opportunities. But in order to expand businesses, to make sure that those connections to opportunities happen, to ensure that folks are able to use the skills that they have and that they gain while they're here, we really have to do a good job in terms of forging those intentional connections. And so, Darren, I'm coming to you. What are you hearing from students that are coming here? How are they motivated? Are there discussions about what they are studying at CCP and then how that's going to help them connect to an opportunity that's here? What does that dialogue look like for you all?
I think so. What my team is typically hearing from students, is, well, one, definitely an interest in some cases, well, in a lot of cases, pursuing a bachelor's degree upon completion. That's still a significant trend. We do see a number of students that are pursuing an associate's degree and they're interested in transitioning into the workforce afterwards. A number of our students are coming here with the intent of finishing a degree and going back home. But we do know that that changes over time for students. In terms of what we're seeing from a trends perspective for particular programs of study that students are interested in, what we're seeing a lot of our students interested in line with some of the growth that we seen in the slides earlier, still a lot of interest in healthcare. We're also seeing a lot of interest in business. And I think, and last but not least, we are seeing a lot of interest in computer science, CIS, so computer information sciences, as well as cybersecurity. And with those, students are interested again in transitioning over to a bachelor's degree program. I think another piece of it I feel like we get a sense of from students is that they're trying to figure it out, which is part of the reason why we see that change in intent as they start here. You know, I think that they're really trying to grapple with affordability and grapple with gaining practical experience afterwards, which I think is a big one for us. Even though we're not seeing enough of this, I'll jump in. I know we talked a little bit, Bill had mentioned a little bit earlier about OPT. Really pushing OPT though, we're seeing We're seeing about 10% of our graduates taking advantage of it right now, but we're really trying to push that number up. Again, a lot of our students are going for a bachelor's degree and they're going right into a bachelor's after they complete, unless they're going home, where we really want students to start to consider more it taking a year to do OPT with us, because you know you get that additional year at for each level of education completion. So for us, after an associate's degree, you had that year. Really trying to be intentional about getting students to think through whether or not that's a good move for them and take advantage of that. If we can see more students take advantage of that, that's another year of practical experience that they get that other students that are going right through don't get. So again, just thinking about that. Those are some of the conversations that we're having, some of the trends that we're seeing in terms of like which programs that we're pursuing and so forth.
I really appreciate the ways in which CCP has responded to demand, right? Of if this is what students are asking for, then these are the programs that we're going to make sure that we're offering. And to that point, Allie, I wanted to hear a little bit from you, right? So you had talked about your work is B2B, and those businesses are colleges and universities. But there's another B that needs to be part of this equation, right? The business. And so in what ways are you, when you're having conversations with institutions, thinking about what the employer community is demanding, what the labor market needs? How does that all fit together for your work?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one of the direct call-outs from that national export strategy that I talked about a little while ago. And the way that this is happening in our states, there's two organizations that I wanted to highlight that I kind of serve as like a liaison type two alongside some of my other colleagues. But within the International Trade Administration, the U.S. Department of Commerce, we have this umbrella initiative called USA as Study Destination. And the intention behind that initiative is to promote the entire U.S. as a premier destination to study, as well as to promote like joint assets across our country, joint educational assets. And we have that trickle down to the state level. So here in Pennsylvania, we have what's called the Study State Consortium, Study Pennsylvania or Study PA. And there's a lot of members in this room and some of the leadership team here as well. But so Study PA does just that for the state of Pennsylvania. It's marketing the state as a premier study destination, and the idea behind that is if you're a member of that organization, you work together with your peer institutions, those benefits will trickle down to the individual institution who's a member. So Study PA is comprised of community colleges, four-year institutions, and universities across the state, and some of those activities that they focus on, or that the organization focuses on, is international student recruitment, but also pulling those resources across the state, professional development opportunities, capitalizing and leveraging some of those federal government programs that I had mentioned, as well as fostering connections for the member institutions across the state, across industry, as well as internationally. So one of those connections that Study PA has been focused on, and it's also a call out of the national export strategy, because there's about 35 study state consortiums across the US in those 35 states, as well as another organization that I want to highlight, which we do have some members of this organization here as well, our District Export Council. And there's a ton of those across the US as well. And our agency works directly with these district export councils. So what those district export councils are, or you might hear them referenced as DECs. We have a lot of acronyms in the government, but as I'm sure you all do too. But those are comprised of business leaders, both manufacturers and service providers that support the local trade ecosystem. So we have one that covers the Philadelphia area called the Mid-Atlantic District Export Council, and it is the business community that Nikki had mentioned. So Study PA has been making a conscious effort to not only connect with that organization, but leverage resources between the two. And now we even have some educational institutions or Study PA members, in our case, sitting as members of that District Export Council. So where these developed was these members were supposed to complement our services and give back to the local trade ecosystem and serve as like advisors and counselors on a voluntary basis to help coach small and medium-sized businesses on exporting and international trade opportunities. And now we've folded education into that space as well. And just to give a little bit more legitimacy to the body, those members, they're nominated by our field offices, like my office in Philadelphia, but they're nominated by the U.S. Secretary of Commerce. So these really are experts in their field. And this deck serves as the communication link between the business community and the federal government. So adding education into that is just heightening this conversation that we're having here today, as well as what we're all individually having. And some of those like cooperation pieces between the District Export Council and the Study State Consortium, or just, if we want to speak more broadly, international education community here in like the Philadelphia area, is the decks have those relationships with those local government entities like the state of PA or the city of Philadelphia can help foster those connections for the educational institutions who are communicating with them, as well as just heighten that message on the economic impact. One of those groups that I share some of this data with is the deck, and that's where I first saw that there really was truly an unawareness just on how important this industry is. And then the deck, those are international businesses, so they can foster those international connections as well. And they're likely hiring international employees or international students, since they already have like one foot in the door doing international trade. So those are some of the key areas that Study PA as an organization, as well as just generally my organization, is helping to foster some of those connections. And then those decks are made up of the business community. So it reflects the industries that are prevalent here in the Philadelphia area. So we have a lot of like life sciences companies, or some of those tech companies. Now we have a handful of educational institutions that are a part of our deck, manufacturers, as well as service providers. So that's where we're seeing some of that connection in the industry and just building awareness around everything that everyone here is working on.
I just want to jump in and build on that point. I think it's important to understand why exports are important, first of all, for an economy. Exports is just think of it as a bigger market. If you're creating a product or a service, you're selling it to your customers. And if they're just in your community, that may be just the borders of your community. If you're selling it way beyond, you can expand your markets, and you also bring back capital into your economy. That is to the extent that you're based in so that's why exports are important. Certainly it's true with educational institutions too. Bringing in tuition into our economy. I also wanted, something you said made me think of the idea of exports and immigrant populations in an area. Immigrants are not only people that come here, they're bringing their connections to their home countries. And there is some really interesting research, in fact, a book just published recently that looks at the flows of capital from international sources to the United States, not so much to cities or metros like Philadelphia, although we can try to parse that out, but it's sometimes called foreign direct investment, sometimes it's called business expansion. And the evidence suggests that when you have an immigrant population in a place, that place also starts to receive more FDI, more foreign direct investment. A friend of mine is a great example of this. He is a Colombian, I'm sorry, Dominican, excuse me. He lives in Philadelphia, he's lived here a long time. He's worked in city government. He opened a coffee shop. And he's sourcing it with his friends back in the Dominican Republic. He created a trade pipeline, a micro one. That's on a tiny scale of what we talk about. That's crossing these two lines of exports. That is export of international students and export of products and services. And I think it's really clear. We don't have a lot of clarity on how important that is to the economy here. I would love to know. Maybe something I'll be able to look at later. And I'm sure there are various factors that can drive it, but I just want to point out that why exports are important.
Tom. You led us directly to our last portion of this conversation. So before we get there, there are cards on your table. If you have questions for the panelists, or if you have questions for Jen and Bill about the research, start getting them together. While I ask Tom, this is a room of doers, right? People are here because they want to know the research, they want to know the facts, they want to root ourselves in the dynamics of what's happening in our region. But at the end of the day, this is about 100 people who are all going to go out and do something. And so we should be thinking about what's next, right? Like, what do we do with this information? How do we use it to affect our day to day, whether it be in our jobs or our lives? So I want to focus on that, right? Like, Tom, what do you hope people take away from your broader research? What are some really keen insights that you had? What do you hope that they pick up on their table and go, oh my goodness, okay, this is a nugget that I can use. What from your most recent research do you really want to call out for these folks?
Well, the bigger picture is our economy, frankly. And it's not just immigrants. Immigrants are just a feeder or a source that we're bringing in. And I think it's important to understand that, I think as you're hearing today, as I'm hearing today, Philadelphia doesn't have a supply problem when it comes to international students. We have one. We have these institutions that occupy, I was in one of the slides, that account for a very large part of our economy. Educational services, educational institutions, they are, I don't want to be too crude with it, but they're cranking out lots of talent, lots of brains. A pretty high percentage of are leaving. We have actually a demand problem, not a supply problem. We do not absorb in our economy the product of these educational institutions as much as it probably stands to reason. We have a lot of them, so no one's going to be able to absorb it all. In our research, we use some of the data that the Campus Philly and Consult produced, and you saw it brought up there. But we compare Philadelphia to 9 other cities. 6 of them are re-emerging gateways like Philadelphia. The other 4 are northeast border cities. And Philadelphia was below average when it came to retaining. We are not retaining them not because the institutions are doing a bad thing or a wrong thing or an incorrect thing necessarily, but the economy needs to absorb, and immigrants can produce and create amazing wealth and companies and jobs and growth for an area, but they don't do that in a vacuum. The economy and the infrastructure has to be there. And if anything, to me, all of this research points out to our Philadelphia's broader challenges of economic development. And we need to have integration between city and region. We need to have political leaders collaborating, cooperating, and talking to each other a lot more. And the leading organizations and businesses in this area, universities, need to be part of that discussion.
Want to drop the mic or? Thanks, Tom. I'm going down this line, Darren. So I'll ask the same of you, right? So what do you hope folks take away from the work that you're doing? What are the trends that you're seeing? What else do you want to share today that you want folks in this room to walk away having heard?
Yeah, I think probably still a portion of something that I should say just go mention momentarily. But first I'll say, I think identify I imagine most institutions have, but be precise in identifying primary and secondary markets. Really think about it and not just even just based on the trends that we're seeing, the historical trends, but using data that's out there to try to get a feel for what some of the future trends might be, making it the data more three-dimensional. So where possible, looking at with the same way that we're looking from a domestic lens, looking at our who's in high school right now and middle school and trying to project out for 10 years, doing the same thing with our primary international markets and secondary international markets. I think that's key. I think the other bigger piece though, has been a theme throughout this conversation, we need to have, facilitate more relationships between schools. There's no, so this message about absorption from an economic standpoint is big, and I certainly hear that. I think the same thing exists at the institution level. I think that, so something that I've been really big on, and that I would encourage institutions here, conversations for institutions here to have with their area community colleges, they can go out for students, for international students, particularly prospective F1 students, that you're not able to admit. What does it look like for you to push for those students to consider enrolling at your area community college? Why, especially recognizing the enrollment cliff that we've talked about, and recognizing that we're going to see students who transition out. What does it look like to get those students back in a couple of years rather than potentially send them to an entirely different region or, more importantly, an entirely different country because they weren't able to get admitted into your institution? So really thinking about it in that way, getting out of the competition lens and really looking at how we can work together, I think that's critical.
Yeah, and I can build on what Darren said there because, just as I shared earlier, that Darren just mentioned, just getting out of that competition, I like how you put that, and collaborating with one another. And as Tom was talking about the importance of exports, you could look at the data and make it feel like we're behind, but we're looking at that as an opportunity, right? Like there's so much room for growth, and that goes across the US as a whole. I know we're talking about education, but 70% of the world's purchasing powers is outside of US borders. So even just a small business or a company or a manufacturer, like a little bit to think outside of our US borders. We've had such a big economy here and such great opportunity here. But when we look at the US and exports, generally, I think our GDP is made up of about 11% of it's made up of exports, where if you look at countries, like Germany, it's nearly 50, China's 20. So if you look at some of those other big players in big countries, the US just as a whole has a lot more opportunity for growth. And then how we're gonna do that growth, and I think a theme that you've heard throughout the day here today or throughout the morning is just that collaboration and that partnership and just having these conversations. Like some of these maybe other regions of our country where, and I don't know this, so I'm just thinking here, but I don't know that they're having conversations like this where there's a concerted effort to improve and to grow. They may be leading us right now, but who knows what we can do, now that we're like putting forth effort and putting forth numbers, data, and action steps to grow our international education industry and help retain some of that talent. So I would say we serve as just a connection point to a lot of these different conversations that you can have, and are just here to support that. So if anything, I think just talking amongst one another and continuing this conversation after today's program wraps up, will go pretty far.
Thank you all. Please join me in thanking our esteemed who are not going to go anywhere. And I'm going to ask Jen and Bill to join us. If we've got questions, we'd love to hear from you.
I know Bill has a couple questions, but again, thank you to the panelists. And I really do agree, Allie, with what you just said. This is such an opportunity. We are lining up all of the information and resources we need here in Greater Philadelphia to really make a move in this space. And we're really excited that you're here. So Bill's gathered a couple questions, but I'm sure there might be others that are percolating around in people's minds. I'm going to walk the floor with the mic. We've got one lonely question. Okay.
Good one though, and beautiful handwriting as well. So the question was, are there any policies currently hindering welcoming international students that affect your work? I can think of an answer to this, but anything on the panel? Okay, I'll start. I think a critical thing that we hear a lot from higher eds is high visa denial rates in a bunch of countries that are critical to our, like they have a lot of demand for US higher education. I think the denial rate in Ethiopia is 78% for F1 visas are denied, which is kind of tragic, especially when you think about the cost that goes into the visa application. Hundreds of dollars that students spend on the chance to have a 90-second conversation with a consular official is quite often very discretionary in its judgment of whether a student is eligible to come here or not. So I know one of the kind of national strategy conversations, a coalition called the US for Success Coalition, that's working at a high level to try and engage around specifically this issue. But any others that come to mind, Darren?
Yeah, Bill, I can build on that and say, I mean, specifically, well, one, so that visa denial rate, that was specifically a challenge, like for our West African countries. Still is a challenge, but it's definitely improved. That's one of the things that's allowed us to really consider, for us to consider Ghana as a secondary market. And we've seen those trends change a little bit, but definitely, an issue. I think I don't think it's, is it a policy? A policy issue to some extent. I think one of the other challenges, I think is cost. And right now, I mean, it's an ongoing issue that we've encountered are just so students being forced to provide, evidence of protocol attendance, being able to have that, but in some cases for a year, but depending on, like in some places at some embassies, 2 years. And that's sort of the goalpost it seems to move sometimes. So that's been a challenge on occasion.
Anyone else in the room who's from a higher ed perspective? Anything you want to share? I know this is a question that rattles around a lot.
Well, just something that we talked about at our table was, okay, so you get the students here, great, right? They've had a wonderful education, fantastic. They feel great about their education, great. And now they're applying for jobs. Employers don't know what OPT is. They don't know that they don't need to sponsor them while they're on OPT. So that's already a hurdle, just this big question mark. And then even in the job application itself, having to designate, will you at any point need sponsorship? Immediately not getting that interview, right? So you have students that come here that spend a fortune on a US education, and now they don't have the US revenue to be able to pay for that education. They have to go back home. So it's terrible. We have students, Brad and I were just talking about, we have students that cry in our offices like weekly about this situation.
Well, this is the other half of the coin of the project that Campus Philly and IHP are partnering on.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. You tee this up. This is not a plan. We are releasing this research ultimately that talks about all the information we just shared with you. But the second part of that is an employer guide designed to really demystify the process of hiring international students throughout the OPT process and moving forward through that. And really, we've leaned on IHP's expertise in this space and heard from a lot of you, frankly, when we were putting this together. That will come out together with the research in just about 2 weeks. So you will get both of those. And then we also recognize that's not enough. We're going to be working closely with the chamber to get in front of employers in this space and really start to open up some of the questions, some of the false narratives that are out there around us, because we realize that we have to be moving in that direction.
I also think many of you in the room will be familiar with the Philadelphia Global Education Hub initiative that's going on. It's a broad collaboration, but kind of the loose steering committee includes Temple, Drexel, IHP, Campus Philly, the Department of Commerce for Philadelphia have been involved. CBB has been involved. So this is an initiative not just to market Philadelphia to internationally, but also figure out together as a collaborative, how can we, lean into this effect and build some mechanism around the discussion with employers as well. Because I think all of we were talking at our table about the enrollment flip and the fact that on the talent acquisition side, you don't hear employers saying, oh crap, where are our employees going to come from in 2 years' time when we are already falling off the cliff in 2025, right? And so it's a thing that a little bit of prevention is worth an ounce of cure for. Is that where? Yes, that's where. So that's part of the work here, is to lean into this messaging and come together to advocate and then scale. Oh yeah, I've got another question. So higher ed is talking so much about the enrollment cliff, but the trends reflected that Gen Z was even lower than now. Could you share historical projected enrollment perspectives of domestic students as this might frame international recruitment?
Historical perspectives around, talk about historical perspectives.
Oh yeah, on domestic students and the trends. Maybe you could give the CCP lens on domestic students.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. We probably, through 2014, 2015, we seen like a peak, at least I'm at community college lens, specifically community college of Philadelphia, seeing our peak run through about 2014, 2015, then we started to see a decline. So even prior to the pandemic, we were seeing a decline in domestic students. That once we got to 2020, it was just like top of the roller. It's crazy because it's not even a roller coaster. It was really already declining. We just faced this steeper cliff. It was terrible. So we already kind of faced our enrollment cliff. In 2020, it basically just ran until 2022. We started to see our uptick in 2022. So right now, for us and for Philadelphia, I guess as a region, we're back. We're on an uptick right now. We expect to see a bit of an uptick in domestic students through next year, 2026, really. I think then looking at Philadelphia graduation rates and not Philadelphia, well, graduation rates, but also just the number of students in high school and looking back from K through 12 numbers over the next 10 years. Essentially, what you see is it starts to flatten out. You see a little decline. It's not, in short, it's not terrible in Philadelphia. Is what we're seeing. It does, however, look a little bit more interesting nationwide. So shout out to you institutions that have to deal with the out-of-state recruitment. That's not so much an issue for us. It's whereas I think from an international perspective, though, we're seeing an increase. Just to be clear, from an increase perspective, we're seeing right now we have a 6% uptick in domestic students, in students overall. Majority of that is domestic. However, when we isolate for international, you heard me mention earlier, we're seeing a 16% uptick. So our international uptick is outpacing our domestic uptick. And again, we don't believe that. We recognize that as this enrollment cliff approaches and institutions become a bit more aggressive, that can present more of a challenge for us from a domestic perspective. So really thinking about what international means for us in the future.
So I would say, this is not an answer to that question, but it's a tangent that's relevant, if you'll indulge me for a second. Tom really hit a nail on the head earlier when you said education is often a proxy for something, right? It's a proxy for skills. And we use education to demonstrate for ourselves, but also to others what we can do, or what we think we're capable of. I think that something like the enrollment cliff, how we are thinking about higher education, is going to fundamentally change how we think about skills and education in this country. And quite frankly, there's a huge movement in workforce development to say, what does it look like to have skills-based talent practices, not from an assessment standpoint, but from a can you demonstrate what you're capable of? Can we give you the benefit of the doubt based on past experience and education for one, making sure that people have better access to opportunities, but then also career mobility. And I do think that this is going to play a huge role in how we are thinking about whether or not we welcome international students, how we are thinking about whether or not we welcome immigrants into the workforce. And then the bigger shift, though, will need to be from the employer side, right? To say, who am I looking for? Not just what degree do I need? And so as we move towards no longer requiring degrees, I do actually think that that is going to be incredibly beneficial for an international student population because of the perhaps other experiences that they've had, the other languages that they can bring to an employer that is saying, I'm focused on what you'll be able to do or what we could do together, not your degree, which will always be important, but I think we're broadening the conversation.
Yeah, and I think just add to this, and I'm rereading Nicole's question here too. Nicole, you talk about just Gen X having been a smaller cohort, and now the millennial generation was huge, right? There were so many of us, and we were a highly educated generation for sure. Gen Z is on track to be the most highly educated generation we've ever had, but there just are frankly fewer of them. So when we think about the need for workers, and we're thinking what you're talking about, really the opening of the marketplace and the questioning of whether degrees are needed for certain jobs, that is an important part of the spectrum as well, as is international talent, as is making sure we create more and more pathways for local talent. we're going to need all of these strategies really to make sure we have the workforce. We need. Any other questions from the group? Oh, we got a couple over here. Okay, bring you the microphone.
I also wanted to share my personal experience. I've lived in Philly for 8 years now. Both my brother and I moved here as international students. I went to Drexel, graduated, worked for 3 years as a tech consultant at Ernst & Young, and I'm currently pursuing my MBA. After all this time, Philly's like a home, and 8 years, you really don't want to leave anymore.
Yeah.
However, when you move to your own visas, it's very hard, despite the whole huge financial investment that both me and my parents had to put forward for this. It's a struggle with the visas, it's a struggle with the OPT, it's a struggle with the H-1B, and I come from Europe, so I can only use Europe as an example right now. What I'm noticing is that a lot of my family and friends are now turning back to Europe. So this trend has also really started. I mean, I didn't want to stay in Europe because I consider Europe very conservative and old. And I saw US as this capitalistic country where it's like so diverse, full of people of different cultures, and I can grow here faster. However, with the shift that a lot of European countries are having, I mean, you can easily move to Germany right now. It's incredibly diverse. They've also made all the immigration very easy. You can work there for 5 years when you have a German passport, which means you have a European Union passport. Same thing for Spain. They followed through. A lot of the European countries are now following through with a lot of really incredible policies that then not even talk about free education. So I'm really kind of worried of how US will match up with a lot of this policies that other countries are spearheading to attract foreign talent, basically. And I'm personally still questioning whether I should go back after my MBA, to be honest. And, you know, I would still go.
I think that's a really helpful anecdote for us to know and internalize as we think about how we talk to each other, how we do this work. I think personalizing it is something that rarely gets, well, at least in sessions like this, you know, we don't necessarily personalize it down to the people level of what impact this has on individuals. But I think that's a crucial story to tell as well, even just from an economic standpoint of like, are we looking at what the competition is doing for the talent that exists? You know, there's another event next week in this space, right, Jeffrey, talking about global movement of talent. Should probably come to that one as well, share the same thing. But I think that's really something that I will take to heart and use in the work I do.
I'm just going to add a couple of points and then we can go on then. So the retention, retaining people who come here is a huge part. It's in some cases more difficult than attracting them to begin with, especially when it comes to international students. This may not be your situation, but it just makes me think of it. One of the things we study, which is a difficult thing to study, is the second generation. First generation is our term for immigrants generally. Second generation is the term for the children of immigrants who were born here. I don't know if that's your situation, but I just want to point, and maybe the folks on the panel know this. Around about, I don't know, at least 3/4 or so, 80% of immigrants' children are born here. Or not immigrants themselves. That makes them US born, and that puts them in a different category for a lot of reasons. It's a complicated role to straddle for a lot of those kids. And it is certainly, it's a mindset that folks have, those folks have, that is more oriented perhaps globally and more apt to move. So it's a challenge. That's also a challenge and an opportunity. Certainly going to embrace that for Philadelphia to hold on to the people that are here and have roots here.
I think we have time for one more question. I'm going to go right here. So this is actually kind of building on what you were just saying.
I heard many times that we want to attract international students, but at times there wasn't enough focus on retention. What resources can you point international students to so that the retention piece is fulfilled?
Campus Philly.
And today has events, Jen can talk about those. International House, a big drive of ours is to try and connect international graduates to employment as well. An event on November 19th. Is that louder? Can you not hear me through the microphone? It's not working. Maybe my mic is on. Okay. On November 19th, we have an event we're calling the International Student Career Kickstarter, which is all about equipping international students who are heading into the workforce next year with both the skills and sort of empowerment to talk about their visa status in a way that gives them some agency and doesn't get into employers like, what is this? How do I deal with this? You know, but also hopefully to connect students to some employers in the region as well. So some people who are prepped to and know the basics about hiring international students, so you don't even have to have that conversation. So we can certainly be a resource for you at Campus Philly as well.
And I'll just add, we have all kinds of resources that are open to all students for sure, but we know that of our full 50,000 student database, 12% are international students, and the students who show up to our event, that skyrockets, almost 30% are international students. So, you know, we certainly can provide resources in that space as well. Okay, well, I'd like to give a round of applause to our panelists. Close out our time together just with a couple updates and things that are coming on and coming up and ways that you can continue the conversation with us. And we've talked about most of these throughout the day, but just to highlight a few, the research report and the employer toolkit that Campus Philly and International House Philadelphia have been working together on for the last year with so much of your support, folks in the room, that will be released in October. So you will be the first to receive it. We will make sure we email you directly with this information so that you have it. And you'll also hopefully see it out in the news as well. So that will be out in October in just a couple weeks. I wanted to also highlight that there's a few opportunities coming up to continue the conversation. We talked about the Philadelphia Global Education Hub earlier, and actually Lisa from Temple is here to really spearhead so much of the work connected to that. But that is such a tremendous gathering space for higher ed leaders and all of the associated partners that care about amplifying Greater Philadelphia as America's college town. Darren, we joked about that before. We know Boston might have an issue with that, right? Us calling ourselves.
Hey, we're trademark.
Yeah, but who cares? We're Philly, right? And really we want to amplify the region as the place to be for international students. From there, you know, a group of us from that Philadelphia Global Ed Hub will be presenting at the PA Council for International Education, PACE, October 25th to the 26th. Our presentation, Lisa, remind me, is it the 25th or the 26th?
It's the 25th at 11:30.
Perfect. And it's here at Temple. We'll be here.
It's at Temple, not in this room.
Not in this room, but here on campus. So that's of interest to you. We hope to see you at that conference. And last but certainly not least, Campus Philly is part of a national network of regions who really care about retaining talent in their regions. We're hosting the Young, Smart, and Local Conference here in November 12th to the 14th. This is going to be a big topic of conversation, really with the national audience in that space, talking about the importance of international talent. So if that rings as interesting to you, please join us for that conference as well. And that is coming up just in November. So thank you. I'm going to hand it off to Bill for some last words. If you've got anything.
No, just a thank you again to Jeffrey Conradi and the CIBER program for hosting us here at Temple Fox School of Business, for our wonderful panelists for sharing all your wisdom and expertise, and of course to you all who we have to stay in touch with and like hit us up if you want to connect with Campus Philly or ISP or both, Philadelphia Global Education Hub, and so we'll see you all again soon.
Thank you.